and welcome to Scale Car Garage. Well, managed to have another coffee talk with another really interesting chap. His name is Alan Schwartz, and my goodness, first of all, not only is he a really, really good builder of amazing slot cars, he's been doing this since slot cars pretty much began. And the stories that he has, oh my goodness. Never mind what he's done in his life. And okay, I don't want to give too much away, but we had a wonderful conversation over coffee, and I wanted to share it with you folks. And he's a wonderful, wonderful person. I really hope you enjoy listening to our conversation as much as I had having the conversation. So without further ado, Mr. Alan Schwartz, here on Scale Car Garage.
I have my mega coffee cup here.
Same here. Well, thanks so much for doing this. I really appreciate it.
Looking forward to it.
Yeah, well, so of course we met via the worldwide slot car chat, but I mean, I think slot cars are maybe a very small part of your of what you do. You please, I'd love to hear a lot about your background because it sounds absolutely fascinating.
Well, I've worn a lot of hats. I'm trained as a scientist.
What particular discipline of science?
Well, my formal training is mostly in physics. But I went from there to the physical chemistry of biological systems. Specifically, my early work was on DNA structure.
Wow.
And then I took some postdoctoral training in clinical pathology and moved to the pharmaceutical industry and worked in, for the most part, in infectious disease, trying in essence to bring some of the approach and some of the rigor of physics to these biological systems.
And I imagine there's a lot of analogies and certainly a lot of applications, I'm sure, that are similar.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, there is a good, it was a good run for a while. I spent about 8 years working on novel antivirals.
Well, that's apropos.
Yes, yeah, very much a current topic. And then I moved from there first into laboratory management. Ended up with, at one point, over 100 people working for me.
Wow.
And then moved from there into the business side of things, into assessing opportunities pretty much on a worldwide basis in the healthcare business, and became involved in mergers and acquisitions.
Wow, that's wild.
I retired about it's a little bit over 20 years ago,
okay.
And set up my own consulting business. In the same vein, I'm mostly retired now, but in point of fact, the reason I couldn't join last night, as I think I mentioned, is I was dealing with a couple of European clients on something that they wanted some review of.
Yeah, and it sounded like some exciting stuff, which is really kind of cool.
Yeah, and aside from that, hobbies. I actually, one of the reasons I was out of slot cars for almost 30 years is I became very involved in sailing.
Oh wow! Now, how big a sailboat were you sailing?
Well, everything from 14 feet up to my last one, which was 35 feet.
How big would a crew be on a 35-foot sailboat?
Well, I mean, for cruising, you do it with two.
Okay.
If you're racing, you probably want two more people.
Wow. And I bet you if you're doing like 4 knots, you're really booking.
Oh, no, no.
No? How fast do they go?
Well, my last one was a 35-footer on a good broad reach and a decent wind. I would see 7.5, 8.5 knots.
That's pretty quick for a boat that size.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Now, okay, with your background in hydrodynamics, I imagine, did you do anything to the boat to sort of help it out, or?
Well, of course.
Awesome.
Actually, most of that was done when I was racing sailing dinghies, the 14 and 17-foot dinghies. I don't know if I mentioned this at one point, but this club that I was racing with, everyone took great pride in the appearance of their boats, and they would come in the beginning of the season with these gleaming, shiny hulls. One chap went so far as instead of painting a boat himself, he would take it to an auto body shop and have them spray a polyurethane finish on it.
Now, I mean, from a actual executional perspective, is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Well, I showed up for the first season, and people wondered, what sort of new member had come to the club, because the bottom of my boat had been sanded until it was absolutely flat dull.
Oh, so it had a matte finish.
Matte finish, yes.
So you were basically like doing like a rat rod version of sailing.
Well, in essence, yeah. I mean, the point of that was, there's a good hydrodynamic reason for it. These shiny hulls would not wet. Water would beat up on them.
Right.
If you threw water at my matte finished hull, the water would spread out very nicely and stick to the surface.
So that's what you want. That's what you want. You want the water to
exactly. Stick. So while they were sailing with the friction of a water boat interface, I was sailing on a water-water interface, essentially lubricating the boat as it went through the water.
So it's like an ice skate on ice, melting the ice and becoming water.
Exactly.
Wow. Very cool. Oh man. And you know what? I'll bet you everyone thought, oh, it looks terrible, and then you just spanked them.
It was fun.
That's awesome. Oh man, that's really, really cool. So I imagine that's the same sort of philosophy as for aerodynamics. You want the air to sort of be on your race car or whatever as much as possible, rather than lifting off and.
Well, this whole business of, the aerodynamics today are directed differently. What they're looking for the most part, is downforce.
Right.
The early work in aerodynamics, for example, the work of Com in the 30s, and the bread van type Ferraris and so on and so forth. What that was designed to do was to basically push the separation eddies behind the car, so it would no longer affect it. So you want laminar flow over the car, and then devil take hindmost once the air is behind you.
Gotcha.
But the studies on that actually began a long time ago. I'm sure you at least know of a World War II fighter plane called the P-51 Mustang.
Yeah, well, that was the first laminar flow wing, was it not?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, which is why the aircraft was incredibly maneuverable and efficient. And
yes, because they had designed the wings so you did not get the separation of flow. Basically, that's similar. That's the same rationale behind the winglets on the end of passenger jets to prevent that eddying.
Right, so it doesn't spill off. So it doesn't spill off the wing, right?
Yeah, right, exactly.
Yeah, everyone thinks it's for lift, but it's not.
No.
And it's the same thing for edges on a wing for a race car as well. You want to sort of dam that air in so it doesn't spill off. Mm-hmm. Oh, very cool. Wow, wow, wow. That is really neat.
And the other thing that I do, well, I don't do it anymore. I used to do a lot of woodworking.
Oh, okay. And would this be like furniture or okay, yeah.
Furniture, speaker cabinets, and so on and so forth.
Right, speaker. Yeah, yeah. Now, what's really interesting, and I'm sure you know why, but speakers, when I were used to be have these huge boxes, I imagine, for resonance. Now you can get a speaker that's maybe one third the size at the very least, and still have amazing sound out of it. Is
Yeah.
that due more to the electronics or the design of the box?
Well, it's a combination of things. Um, this was really pioneered. Damn, I forgot his name now. Who was it who developed the AR speakers?
I don't know.
Hey, that you know, one of the things that comes with age. I'm sorry.
No worries. Listen, I'm terrible with names. Please, but that's okay.
Anyway, the physics of it is that you can essentially trade off efficiency to a certain extent for performance.
That sounds like life.
Yeah, and yeah, you can build speakers that are quite small and quite good. They are also very inefficient, which means you need a lot of amplifier power. When I started dealing with audio systems back in the late 40s, early 50s, you really busted a gut to get 12 watts out of an amplifier. I'm serious. It was, you know, it was no small feat. You know, a 20-watt amplifier was a real powerhouse.
Mm-hmm.
These days, I mean, you know, in my system, which is in the other room, it's a 2-channel system, and I've got a 250 watt per channel solid state amplifier running it.
That'll blow dry your hair.
Yeah.
Wow. Holy cow. That's neat.
Sorry, I still favor large speakers.
Is that right? Yeah. Just for the sound, or?
Yeah. One of the issues that you get into in this business is the question of dispersion. You know, in one respect, the smaller you can make the speaker, the better off you are, because your ideal source for appropriate dispersion, stereo effect, and so on and so forth would be a point source.
Okay. Yeah.
Large speaker, you do have some problem with sound diffraction around the front of the speaker. Because if you think about it, you know, the sound waves are coming out from the speaker cone and they're expanding. Some of them basically hit the front of the speaker and bounce.
Bounce. Okay, right. Gotcha.
You don't really want that to happen.
What about low frequencies though? Do you still need a big box for low, like bass frequencies?
Well, certainly bigger than you need for mids and highs. Low frequencies, the point source is not such an issue because you get low enough and the low frequency tends to be non-directional, which is why you will often see a combination of, you know, 2 monitor-sized speakers and then a low-frequency woofer set off somewhere else. And
right.
It can be sort of set almost anywhere because since the low frequencies tend to be non-directional, they do not contribute to the stereo effect.
Gotcha. Right. Gotcha. Okay, that makes perfect sense. Yeah, that's really cool. So I imagine this. So sailing was your one of your hobbies, and then was there anything else besides slot cars, or?
Well, it all started out with model railroads, but the slot cars displaced those. And I do play a bit with photography.
Okay. Now, are you still a film photographer, or do you prefer digital, or?
Well, you know, it's sort of interesting. It was about. I started out assembling a Leica system in the late 50s.
Oh wow! So large format. Large format or 35 mil?
No, 35 millimeter. If you look, for example, at my website, I don't know if you've looked at it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
At all. All right, the picture starting it is one that I took at Mount Equinox in New Hampshire some years ago. That was taken, and it was taken on one of my favorite black and white films, ADOX KB14, which was, I don't think it's ever around anymore, an ultra fine grain black and white film.
Wow.
I mean, you can take an ADOX KB14 negative and blow it up to 3 by 4 feet, and it's still fine. And it was developed in microdol. If you look carefully at the picture, I'm rather proud of it because I caught the car when it was starting. If you look at it, the rear wheels are spinning. The front wheels haven't started to move yet.
Right. Yeah. Very cool. Very cool shot. Oh yeah.
But so I like the darkroom side of things. And when I was in university and working in the laboratory, there was always a darkroom available. I never had one of my own. I continued on with the Leica equipment until, well, let's see, I got my current system just when my daughter was graduating from her secondary school, so that would have been 09. So I kept it for, 40 some odd years. Sold it for enough to buy a very nice Nikon digital setup.
Oh, wow.
Money left over. I like that because now I'm back in the darkroom, except now the darkroom is my computer.
Right. Oh, very cool. Okay, that's very cool. So you've gone. So now, how much of your background in the chemistry of photography transfers over to the digital side?
Not much.
Oh, okay.
Not much. Some of the things you learn in the darkroom, issues of contrast and so on and so forth. I mean, you have the same criteria, but different ways of satisfying them.
Okay. And as far as resolution, are you pleased with the level of resolution you're getting in digital versus what you were getting in film?
Yeah, I mean, my Nikon system is now 11 years old. So, given the progress, I mean, it is now hopelessly obsolete. The camera is only, I think, it's a 12 megapixel camera, and I mean, hell, cell phones do better than that these days. But for what I use it for, and I really simply have no need to go beyond about an 11 by 14 blow up. It's perfectly fine.
Right. Well, I can imagine you can always upgrade the body if you choose, and your lenses will still work.
Yeah.
Wow, that's awesome. Well, now, have you done any slot car photography with it at all? Is that what you're using to sort of take photos of your cars?
Yeah, I use that. I haven't done that much. I mean, mostly what I've done in terms of the slot cars is really mostly for recording build projects.
Right. Very cool. So when did you start? You were a railroad modeler, and then you transitioned to slot cars. When did the transition happen?
58.
In 58. So you were really an early adopter then.
Oh yeah. Yeah. The way it went, I think I discussed some of this on my website, but I was in graduate school in New York, 1958. And two things sort of came together. I did have some racing background in the one-to-one cars in the mid-50s.
Oh, what did you race?
Well, there are a couple of us together. We sort of swapped out cars. I have to be careful about this because my name was not on it.
Okay.
Let's just say that there was a disconnect between my age and the SCCA competition license requirement.
Gotcha.
Okay. But I ran an Allard at one point.
A J2X or?
Yes, J2X.
Nice.
And I did a couple of stints with an Ace Bristol.
Wow, boy, that basically is the progenitor to the Cobra.
Yeah, but it's a completely different car.
Absolutely, the suspension is different, the engine's different, but general.
Basically, what Shelby did was he sort of jacked up the body and pushed a new car under it.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. That's true. Sorry, I just thought I'd.
Yeah, no, you're right. I remember the first time I saw Cobras running. I was living in California and went up to a race. I think it was the track is gone now, but at Pomona.
Yep.
And they were running, and I think they were running the 427 Cobras at that point. And they were something to watch because I mean the Bristol was a 2-liter car, and you had to handle it with a certain delicacy. You get it too sideways and you just scrub off speed, and that 2-liter engine did not have enough torque to really whomp me in there. And here came these damn 427s. They would just get them totally sideways on a corner and then wham, step on it and go burning out. It was a completely different style.
Yeah, no kidding. Oh my gosh. So yeah, I remember Pomona. Did you ever race at Riverside at all?
No. I was out of it by that point. I ran at a couple of tracks, eastern tracks, Lime Rock.
Oh wow.
Yeah, Thompson, the old Thompson course.
Yeah, I've heard that.
And an interesting one, Montgomery.
I
haven't heard of it.
Where was that?
Well, that was not far from my hometown in the Hudson Valley. Montgomery was a World War II Air Force base. I'll tell you a funny story about that in a moment.
Yeah.
Which was closed down after the war, and was co-opted for some racing. It has since actually turned back into a commercial airport.
Wow.
One of the chaps who was flying out of there made a bit of a splash when I think he wanted to sort of say goodbye to his local sweetheart, and took his B-17.
He had a B-17?
Well, it was the captain of the B-17, and he flew it under the Mid-Hudson River Bridge.
You're kidding.
No.
That's wild. Holy crow. Oh.
So anyway, I had this interest in cars, which my father and I shared. I was living in New York, and there was a interesting little store on 57th Street called Motor Books.
Uh-huh.
And they sold exactly that, including a slender periodical from England, from the Model Aeronautical Press, called Model Maker.
All right.
So he picked up the Model Maker in those days, and sandwiched in between stories on model racing yachts and model steam-powered tugs, and a few other things, were a few pages devoted to slot car racing.
Ah.
All right. So that was piece one. Piece number two, there was a store at 34th Street and 5th Avenue called Polk's.
Polk's Hobbies, yeah.
Hobbies, yeah.
Right.
And I went in there one day, and there was a Scalextric set.
So this must have been the very first one with the rubberized track and
the rubber track, yes, and the tin cars.
And the buttons.
And the buttons, yeah. And I don't recall what the price was. It was a bit steep on a graduate student's budget. But New York being what it is, if you look around long enough, you can always find someone who can get it for you wholesale. And that's exactly what happened. And I took this nice box back to my apartment. I'd lived in the Village for the first year or so that I was down there, was now sharing an apartment out in Queens, not far from LaGuardia Airport, with a college fraternity brother, Belgian chap. And, this was very quickly set up on the floor of the apartment somewhere around here. I think I have a picture of the cars there, and things progressed from there.
So if they were the tin cars, they had the gimbal in the front then?
Yes.
Wow.
And I'll tell you something about that gimbal.
Okay.
It just so happened, as I discovered one day, that if you had a cigar tube of the proper size, you could take a Merit 1/24 plastic kit and burn a hole in the lower section of just the right size to accept the gimbal.
Oh.
And then you take the motor out of one of these tin plate scale-electric cars and you glue it into the back of the Merit kit, and voila, you've got a van wall, a 1/24 van wall.
Wow. So how many of those did you make?
I only made one or two. I mean, there were all sorts of problems. The gimbals were a problem. I've got a box around here somewhere that's going to go on eBay very shortly of, I don't know, 20 or 30 motors and bodies and the whole shooting match. The problem with the gimbal was a simple one. You had this little gimbal, it's like, two bells glued together with insulator between them, and the shafts that came out. Then the shafts rode on arcs of, I think it was probably brass or phosphor bronze, which allowed it to turn and still conduct the electricity, more or less. The problem was that because the cars were mostly running in a straight line, those little shafts would start to wear depressions in these contact arcs. And all of a sudden, they wouldn't turn so well anymore. And I found out you could fill them in with solder and repolish them and so on and so forth. But that was going nowhere. And as the things progressed, I was living in New York, but I would go home, the family home on weekends, where we had dismantled the railroads and were building up a 4-lane rubber scale-electric track.
Wow.
I had an idea, and I don't know where the idea came from. Maybe I'd seen something, but a friend of the family's ran a large manufacturing operation which had a machine shop in it.
Okay.
And he very nicely took a piece of square Teflon bar and machined it into a T shape for me.
Oh.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Now I could cut off about an inch or so of that T, fix a shaft to it, put a couple of 0090 machine screws and bolts, optical screws, through the front edge of it, and attach a couple of phosphor bronze wipers.
You had a guide blade.
Yeah.
Wow. That's
and
so cool.
As soon as those discoveries, quotes, had been made, the tin plate scale electric went into a box, never to be seen again.
That's wild. Now, so now I imagine there weren't a lot of cars available at that point, so you must have had to scratch build most of the stuff that you wanted to drive.
Oh yeah. And the motors, for a while I was using the scale electric motors, but they were a problem as well. First thing that happened, those, I don't know if you've ever seen, I don't have them going around, they were an odd sort of plastic version, not unlike the Pitman DC70X series. Where the you had a small pinion on the armature shaft, and then a built-in axle with a nylon driven gear. That driven gear would loosen up on the shaft.
Ah.
Okay, all right. So you cross drill it and pin it. So problem number one solved. Second problem is they would tend to overheat, and they would stop running, and you would open them up and find out that what had happened was that the armature connection had melted off the commutator.
They melted off?
Yeah, the solder melted.
Oh, the solder mill. Okay, got you. Right.
So
Sorry.
you solder it back on again.
Right.
Well, you can only do that so many times with this plastic housing with the bent over tabs and so on and so forth. And eventually it comes. I was in a model shop one day looking at various motors. And the proprietor, who I knew very well, he said, "You ought to look at this." And he showed me what was called a Pitman conversion motor.
Hmm.
They were called a conversion motor because they were designed, and there's an irony here, to replace the cheap Japanese motors, which were supplied with the Hobbytown diesel locomotives.
Ah, okay.
And basically what it was a motor with, a built-in shaft with a reduction gear on it and a long shaft that extended out. So it actually went over the trucks on either end of the diesel,
Right.
and then drove those through a twisted rubber band.
Yep. A twisted rubber band.
Yep.
Wow.
However, the same motor could be taken. The shaft could be shortened. It was an 1/8-inch shaft. And it could be fitted into the back of a 1/24th car,
Uh,
and wheels applied to either end.
there you go.
There you go.
Oh, wow. Very cool. So how many of those scratch builds did you make at the time?
Oh,
So quite a few, I imagine.
I would guess probably 12 to 15 of them, maybe more. I still have 3 of them left in running condition.
Wow.
The van wall
Yeah.
and a Mercedes-Benz W196
Six. Yeah.
and 2 D-type Jaguars, all
Ooh,
based on merit kits.
oh, and I was going to ask where you got the merit kits. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Very cool.
So they were all 1/24th. And you can race those 1/24th cars on the old Scalextric rubber track. Prudence in the corners is required.
That's exactly what I was going to ask. I was like, okay, did you actually drive them on that track? 'Cause the track was a wee bit narrow, wasn't
It was. It was narrow. The second thing that happened to it was with use, it became polished.
Oh, right. Yeah, the rubber, I guess, would just smooth down.
Literally, I've
smooth
got a
down.
photograph around somewhere, which I can send to you, which shows the starting line of one of the races. And you can literally see the reflections of the cars in the track.
It got that smooth?
Yes.
So I imagine if your tires were off a wee bit, you just slid around like
Yeah.
crazy.
Yeah. So I painted it.
Ah, okay. So what type of paint did you use?
Sandtex.
Oh, with grit in it. Right, 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 right,
Yes,
right. Great idea. So that must have solved all the problems then.
it did. And there was an interesting collaboration there. My father was an interested participant in all this. I built the cars, and he loved to do scenery.
Oh, that's a perfect partnership.
Yep.
So do you have any photos of the tracks that you built with the scenery and the cars at all?
I've got a few of them.
Oh, you should get them because I don't think I saw those on your website.
I don't think they are. I need to put them in. The website hasn't been touched since I first put it up. I really need to get back to it.
Those would be just brilliant to see.
Yeah.
Wow. So you were really ahead of the curve. I mean, people like now are just getting into the concept of putting scenery on a slot car track because, when I was young, it was just throw it on the floor, and when Christmas was over, you put it in the box and you waited till the next fall and Christmas. But now it's basically what you were doing at the beginning, where you're building a scenic layout that you could race on.
Yeah. But that only lasted until about 64, 65. I'd gotten married and moved to California.
Well,
doing,
and that's where slot cars were starting to really bubble up, was California.
yeah, and you know, the next little bit reveals a long-standing prejudice of mine. We're living in La Jolla, and I found a track in El Cajon, and I sent a note off to my father, and a box arrived with some of the cars in it and some rudimentary tools. And we went out to the track, and the cars didn't run very well because the phosphor bronze springs that I used for pickup were not compatible with the braid.
Oh.
But it was a simple matter to clip those off and simply solder on braid.
Mhm.
And they had an interesting deal going out there. You went out there and there was, I guess you anteed up something like $5 for a night of racing. And the end of it, part of that went to the track owner, but there was a pot.
Oh.
So for several months, my wife and I would go out there. She was also very interested. We would run and enjoy a very nice after-race coffee and dessert on the way home, courtesy of the cars.
Oh, so that pot was like the prize money for racing?
Yeah, there was a prize. Yeah.
So you were one of the very elementary pro racers in slot cars then?
Yeah, but so then I went out there one day, and you know, people had watched what I was doing, and this guy shows up with a model of it was an 804 Porsche.
Hmm.
He had taken the same Sidewinder Pitman motors that I was using and put two of them in the back with four wheels.
With four wheels, so it was a six-wheeled car?
Six-wheel car with four driving at the back. And I objected to that, saying, you know, there was no such car.
Yeah, rightfully
But
so.
the people who I think had gotten rather tired of my winning responded, no, but there might have been. And as I related on my website, the next week I put the cars back in their metal traveling cases, went into a little shop in downtown La Jolla called the Model Ship Chandlers, and bought a ship model.
It was, oh, wow.
So I gave it up, basically. It was about 65. Touch very briefly back some years later. I was living in a Chicago suburb, and I found a track in Evanston, and I still had all my cars, but you know, by this time, this was, I don't know, that was 65. This would have been in the 70s. It was 10 years later. And of course, their tires had turned to rocks.
Rock, yeah.
So I went into the shop, figured, all right, I'm going to buy some new tires and we'll come racing. Well, they had tires. They had green ones and pink ones. And they had these things running around this track, which looked like, you know, flying doorstops or dustpans.
So it basically, you time traveled, really.
Right. And I looked at that and I said, not for me.
Right.
So in essence, although there were a few spotty recurrences, I was out of slot car racing from 65 for about 30 years.
So what was the impetus to rediscover?
Well, my son picked up a magazine somewhere, and in the back of it, he found a little ad insert from a chap who lived not far from where I was, who was looking for people interested in slot car racing. So I called him. And it happened to be a fellow by the name of Todd Brace. And I went down there, and there was another chap there with him. His name was Jim Butt. Jim was on a number of the forums, subdued.
Oh, okay. Yes, yes, yes.
And I brought my 1/24th cars along with me, what's going to happen. I got down there, and Todd had a large, permanent, it might have been a Revell track, I'm not sure. One of the plastic tracks. And there were these things going around it at what I thought were really unconscionable speeds. And they were this is my first introduction to magnet cars.
Okay.
And they were the Fly magnet cars.
Right. They look great, and without the magnets, they drove. But
right.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I fell in with that group. I bought a couple of 1/32 cars. I still had all the tools and bits and pieces around, and there it went.
Okay. So did you start building your own chassis like immediately, or did you sort of try and sort of explore what the plastic chassis were like, or?
Well, I started. I built I bought a few cars, tried it out, but then that was the genesis of this local group we have, the Interstate Home Slot Racing Consortium.
Nice.
What we have here are about, it varies, the number goes up and down. I rebuilt my old track, and then I ended up buying a whole lot of track from a chap who had gone head over heels into it, then decided to get out.
Now, what type of track were you using, Al?
Scale Electric.
Okay, sorry.
But basically, what we have around here at the moment is, I guess there are about half a dozen tracks. They're all home tracks. At this point, they are all routed tracks. Wow. Some with braid, some with copper tape. And we have this very informal group. There are no officers, there are no dues. One person takes the lead on setting up the year's rules, and we achieve a consensus. The schedule is set up. And we have typically bi-monthly races, usually starting end of September, early October. The whole thing, of course, is in flux this year.
Right.
There's been a good deal of discussion of that. And that group has changed and matured over the years. And my building projects have sort of followed it. I mean, I enjoy racing, but I really like the planning and building more.
Right, as evident in your builds. That's why I asked, because they're works of art. I mean, it's functional art.
And the group has changed in terms of makeup and in terms of events. At one point it was sort of a, whatever cars you have, let's put them on the track and race. And it went from that to, all right, let's kind of divide up the cars into eras. So,
right.
You don't have an LMP car running against,
a Porsche 550 or something. Yeah, right. I got you. Yeah.
And at that point, it was kind of a free-for-all. You could run a stock car, although we always typically had one stock class. One of the ones that was really a lot of fun, even though the cars were a bunch of crap. We did run a class one year for stock Ninco sports cars.
Oh, so like the Ferrari Barchetta, the 356 Porsche.
Right.
They had an XK 120 as well.
Mm-hmm.
Testarossa, I think they had.
Yeah. And, with all of their faults, the flexing chassis and the Ninco hop and the wheels falling off.
Well, but what made those cars so enjoyable were the motors. The NC1 motors were just lovely.
Yeah, they were, and they ran pretty well. we ended up finding substitutes because even by today's standards, the price of those motors is outrageous.
Yeah, yeah. What can you do?
If you
And
needed
I'll
it,
bet you that that NC1 motor was, I guess, a bit of a fluke because they never replicated it.
no. And then it sort of progressed to keep it in scale, keep it in period, but build whatever you want. Currently, we have 4 classes, 2 of which are a real interest to me. The other 2 I participate in just for practice. There's a class really designed to help people ease into the program, which is the Carrera GT cars.
Okay, yeah.
And you basically can't change anything except change, I think, into a red guide instead of the one that comes with it. And there's a spec tire for that class, which is a Paul gauge tire.
Nice.
Um,
Well, that alone will help the car move, I guess, a little bit. Yeah.
I mean, we don't run magnets.
Oh, excellent. Yeah.
And then there's another one for Fly LMP cars,
Okay.
which gives you a little more wiggle room in terms of what you want to do. But again, there's a spec tire for that, which is a sponge tire, which is one of my pet peeves because people are always, dousing with this, that, and the other cow piss.
That's hilarious. Wow, that's really cool. So it sounds like it's really a lot of fun.
Oh yeah, and then the other ones, the classes that I like. There's a class for pre-1962 sports cars.
Oh, now have you made an Allard like you raced back in the day?
I haven't yet. It's in the program, but there's a class for pre-1962 sports cars. The only significant restriction in that class is there's a motor restriction. You're restricted to the, a FC130 can, no more than 14.7 K.
Right.
So an NC1 will do, one of Al Penrose's motors will do.
Yep.
There's also an H&R motor, which comes into the same spec.
Okay, cool. Well, that must be a lot of fun.
That's these motors.
Oh, yeah.
The blue cans. And the other one is a 63 to 74 sports class. That one has a spec motor, which is the H&R 18K motor. Not much in the way of restrictions on that except overall width. And again, anything goes. And that, you build your own or, buy one or however you want. I enjoy those. I brindle a little bit at the motor spec because my game 12, 15 years ago was to build a car with a machined brass chassis and put one hell of a powerful motor in it.
That's wild. That's great.
And then watch people try to stay with me in the corners. These cars, they were well over 100 grams. They're heavy cars.
Wow. Well, and how long are the tracks? Like, I imagine they vary in length, but like from.
Typically, probably 80 to 90 feet.
That's pretty long. Those
Yeah, we have one which is about 130.
And that one's routed?
Yep.
Wow.
That one is interesting. It's got about an 18-foot straightaway that dips down and then rises up to a banked corner again.
Oh, so you're on the throttle for quite a while then.
You can really fly on that track.
That's awesome. Oh man, gee whiz. So your current stable then, how many cars do you have in your stable that you rotate or race?
Well, on the in the two classes, the Carrera class and the Fly LMP class, I just have one of each.
Oh wow. So you really focus yourself then. That's well done. Well done.
Yeah, I just have one of each. What was the last car I bought? The last car I bought was a idea for a conversion. The body appealed to me, so I think it's a Fly. It's that mid-70s Le Mans Matra.
Oh, okay.
You know, the really low one.
Wow, nice.
And I've got another body around again for that class, the Shadow DN4.
Okay, yeah. Wow.
But most of my focus is on the pre-62 stuff.
I was going to ask you what your favorite era to model and to
Well, I mean,
race.
you know, that's the era I grew up with.
Yeah.
And besides which, there's another thing I like about it. I suppose there's a little bit of the Don Quixote in me. I enjoy tilting at windmills.
I was going to say you have to bring a windmill along with you. Yep.
And one of the things I like to play with is to see if I can devise a way to take one of the cars that I like, which by its dimensions would not normally be an ideal candidate for the class, and get enough speed out of it so it can run a respectable race. And there's that example.
Yeah, please.
Well, one, of course, is the Morgan that we talked about the other day.
Yeah.
But I've got
I can't wait to see that build. That's going to be awesome.
I've got another one here. This one arrived recently from New Zealand.
Oh, wonderful.
And this is John Warren's version of the Maserati A6 GCS.
Oh, yeah. And they were a really tiny car, weren't they?
They're very small. Very small. Ideally, what I would like to do, but the rules don't prohibit it. This is quite a light shell. It's a small car. Given my druthers, I would use a slimline, an FF050 motor in it.
Right.
But at this point, our rules do not allow that, because somebody, who we shall not mention, experimented with using slimline motors, and it was discovered that the car with a slimline motor would just walk away from these 14K C-can motors.
No kidding.
Yep.
So is it a combination of RPM and weight, or? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, they're very light, and of course they're very low in the car.
Right. Gotcha. Okay. Wow. Because that's going to be a super car once you get done.
Yeah. So anyway, so that's what happens here.
Well, that's great. Oh my goodness. Well, thank you so much. I mean, I don't know if you have any of your actual completed builds handy that you can show a little bit, but if you do, great.
Let's see. Here's one. This is just a chassis.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine.
Which I'm revising at the moment. This is from a Ferguson P99.
Oh yeah. Now but you've only got it working on 2-wheel drive though.
Right. That's what's being revised.
Oh, you're gonna make it 4-wheel drive?
Yes.
Well, I see a shaft there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh.
The shaft there was because I wanted to duplicate the cockpit of the Ferguson, which has the drive shaft running down the left-hand side of the cockpit. So I put together this rather complicated bit of
It
monkey.
actually has a gearbox.
Oh yeah.
I can guarantee it'll run better than the real car did.
Well, the real car, after all, did win one race.
It did. Yeah. I felt sorry for poor Sir Sterling the last time he drove it. Every time he tried it at Goodwood, I think, or wherever he was trying to show the car, it kept breaking down.
Yeah, I mean it's an interesting challenge. Here's the body shell for it. There is not a lot of room.
Oh no, not at all. And that looks like a slush mold as well.
Yes, it is.
That's amazing. That gearbox at the back is just, oh my gosh, that's cool.
Well, I'm not going to duplicate that. At the moment, I'm toying with one of two ideas. My first thought was to use a slimline motor, a dual shaft slimline motor, and just take a drive off both ends.
Right.
There's a problem there. I pointed out to people, the dual shaft slimline motors are stocked on a shelf, which is right next to the place where they stock the unicorn horns.
That's right, because they've got a closed end and then the shaft sticks up.
Right.
Right. You'd almost have to make it yourself.
Well, I think it is possible. We're experimenting with this at the moment, to open one up, disassemble the commutator and armature from the shaft that comes with it, and simply put a longer shaft in that will extend to both ends.
Ah.
Because the shaft actually, it does show at the end of the standard one. You can see it there.
Yeah, it's just got a cap on it, right?
That's right. So we're going to see if that works.
Wow.
If not, I'll just put a little motor each end. Have you ever heard Peter Ustinov's masterpiece, The Grand Prix of Gibraltar?
Oh yeah, yeah, it's awesome.
Well, as Signor Fanfani says in that, duo piccolo motore.
Well, and you know what? Someone tried that in Can-Am. They tried, like, I think it were 4 snowmobile motors, one on each wheel. I don't think they'd even made it out of the pits, but that was
Probably
something.
not.
Yeah, but somebody tried it.
Yeah.
I don't know how, especially in the late '60s, how you would sync 4 snowmobile motors, and why snowmobile motors, I have no idea. I guess because they were air cooled.
Air cooled, and they're the specific output on a horsepower per weight basis with those little motors is astounding.
Right. Yeah. It was almost as bad as the original Shadow that had what, like 10-inch wheels or something at the front, but 13-inch brakes.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, that's really cool. Al, thank you so much for taking the time.
Oh, sort of interesting. So, what happens at your end?
Well, geez, I'm just doing some scale car garage stuff and some stuff in the workshop, and playing Uber for our daughter and my wife. So that's about it, which is busy enough.
Yeah.
But you do some amazing work there. Now, so you were also talking about milling. Have you milled anything lately?
Not lately. No, I'm still in the process of setting my milling machine up. Things tend to go a little bit slowly. One of the things which gets in the way, I really shouldn't complain, but what the hell? I have carpal tunnel syndrome in both hands.
Okay.
And one of the examples, things about this, for example, is you will, unless it is absolutely necessary, you will never see me in anything except a pullover polo shirt or a winter equivalent. Because putting on a regular shirt and buttoning it up is a 10 to 15 minute exercise in frustration.
Now, have you ever thought about using like omega-3s or something to try and help loosen joints and so forth?
Tried all sorts of things. I've had surgery on both hands. It's just, it's a problem that won't go away. So I do things, but I do them slowly.
Okay.
And getting the milling machine set up requires a combination of control and strength, which I have on some days, and some days I don't. So, just sort of wait.
Gotcha.
But I am heading that way. Part of the reason I'm doing that is I'm a great believer in mental exercise as a way to ward off senility and all the things that come with it.
Yeah, because where the mind goes, the body follows.
That's right. So, and at my age, this becomes a real, it's certainly a question worth asking. So, I'm in the process of learning CAD and CAM, and the programming and the interactions and so on and so forth. So, half the time I spend, working on getting the mill set up. The other half the time I spend reading the manuals and, playing with the programs.
That's awesome. So now playing with the programs, are you just doing motor brackets to start off with, or what types of things are you learning with? Which components?
Probably building motor brackets, building parts of chassis, front brackets. The other thing I want to do, silliness, I grant you, but it's a bit of vanity. A lot of the cars that I've built lately are using rattle pans.
Yeah.
When I was building the machine brass chassis, I tended to build center pivot flex chassis with side pans.
Okay.
I've gone, because of the motor restrictions locally, I've gone away from these very heavy cars and tried to build them as light as possible, but still allow for enough space to put a rattle pan underneath them. And one of the stupid things I want to do is I want to set up the milling machine, which does have the capability, so that I can take the rattle pan after I've finished it and engrave Ecurie Martini on the bottom.
That's awesome.
Small things please small minds.
Well, have you thought about using, if you're really concerned about weight, combining different types of materials, like maybe brass with some magnesium or some sort of alloy? Or
yeah, I've looked at that. Oddly enough, the material that I prefer to use is steel. And my second preference is nickel silver.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Nickel silver is a nice material. Nickel silver is what the Penelope pit lane chassis are made from.
Right. Yeah.
Reasoning behind that, brass has one salient attribute, two at most. It does machine, drill, and file and saw fairly easily, and it solders easily.
Right.
But brass discolors, it tarnishes, and it is soft. Even if you start out with hard-tempered brass, by the time you solder anything onto it, it's soft. So that if you bang it, it's going to bend.
Right.
Okay. Not very strong. Aluminum can be a useful material.
Mm-hmm.
The big problem with aluminum, of course, is fastenings. I have used aluminum on a couple of chassis. One for a 2900C Alfa Romeo that I built, where I used a combination of aluminum end pieces and carbon fiber chassis members, with a carbon fiber chassis member held to the aluminum by drilling holes in the aluminum end pieces and putting set screws in to hold the carbon fiber. But aluminum, you can't glue to it, and yes, you can solder it, but the soldering is problematical, difficult, and the joints can be very questionable, and it's very hard to determine whether you've got a good joint or not.
And plus, the material itself, I imagine, is a wee bit softer, or at least brittle, because you can only bend aluminum so much, and then you have to cast it.
So, the thing I like about steel, stainless steel in particular, is that It's very strong. You can cut it to very thin sections and still have more strength than you could possibly need. It solders very easily.
Stainless steel, really?
Yeah, in my opinion, in some respects, easier than brass. And I'll tell you why. In soldering, you want heat, and you want heat right there,
Right.
not somewhere else.
Right.
Brass is a good conductor of heat, which means you have to pump more heat into the right there because a lot of it goes somewhere else.
Right. It just transfers away.
Right. That doesn't happen with steel. Steel is a very poor conductor of heat.
Oh.
Okay. So you use a good aggressive acid flux, something like Stay-Bright, and Stay-Bright or Tix solder, and you can get joints on stainless steel that are as strong as you could possibly want them.
So you don't have to use any heat sinks with steel or anything like that?
Well, you know, if you're working very close, you do.
Okay.
But in the main, no. And of course, I mean, I have an ace in the hole here for tough spots. I have a resistance soldering system.
Right. Yes, you were mentioning that, and that sounds like incredible. It's almost like a spot welder for crying
Yes,
out loud.
it can be very close. But you work with stainless steel. Yes, you have to work harder to cut it. No question about it. If you want to cut stainless steel rod, you better use an abrasive disc because a model hacksaw is not going to do much.
Right.
But once you've soldered it up and cleaned up the solder joints and polished them up, the solder joints become invisible, and the chassis will look the same 2 years from now as it does today.
So there's no, because it's stainless steel, it won't oxidize at all.
That's right.
Ah, okay. And as far as flex and weight and all the other sort of things we love brass for,
Well, number one, brass is heavier than steel.
right.
The flex you can get simply by dealing with the sections on it.
Okay.
Now, for example, typically on 132nd chassis, where I'm using a rear bracket and a front bracket, and there's going to be wire connecting them, I'll use probably depending on the weight of the car and where I'll use anywhere from a 39 thousandths to a 50 thousandths spring tempered stainless steel wire rod.
That's it.
That's it. And one on each side is more than enough.
So the chassis weighs, I imagine, like next to nothing.
Mm-hmm.
Now, okay, but here lies, if what about the center of gravity going higher? Does that affect the car at all?
No, that's why I put the rattle pan underneath.
Ah, okay. Wow, that's really cool. So you know, you just make sure you don't get yourself banned from your club.
No, they're okay with it because I mean these days eye-hand coordination is not what it used to be. So
Well, yeah, but
I sort of fight to keep myself out of last place, but it's fun.
oh man, that's so. Now with the bodies that you showed, particularly the Maserati and the Morgan that you're working on, are those the designs that you're going to be using for those cars?
Yeah, I'm still playing with the design. I think it is possible in both of those cars, oddly enough, I think I can just get away with using a Sidewinder chassis.
So even in the Maserati, which is quite small.
Yeah. Or worst case, possibly an angle winder. Now, that will mean using relatively narrow wheels and tires. Not relatively, using narrow wheels and tires. Yeah. But that's what those cars mounted.
That's exactly right. They had very, very narrow bias ply tires.
That's right.
Yeah.
You know, a typical wheel fitment for something like the Maserati would have been a 550 or 600 by 16.
Right.
Wheel.
Yeah.
You know.
That's right. Very tall and narrow.
Yeah, about, with about that much tread.
Yeah.
Again, that's one of the challenges. But interestingly enough, depending on the model and how it's built, I don't really subscribe to the notion that wider is always better in terms of tires.
Okay.
If you think about it, let's go back to railroads for a moment.
Mm-hmm.
Think about a steam locomotive. How big do you think the contact patch between the drivers of a steam locomotive and the rail is?
Oh, it's not as big as you think. It's maybe like the width of your hand, maybe?
Oh no, it's about the width of a chalk line.
Really?
Yeah. Well, you think about this round steel wheel on this flat steel track. The wheel doesn't deform very much, but it does deform a little bit. Now, my prejudice is that you need something of the same thing in any rubber tire.
Well,
In other
yeah,
words,
I guess, but a rubber tire, especially when you start getting to the edge of its adherence, is always, got a slip angle, right?
mm-hmm. But it's got a slip. But if you look at if you start doing the calculations of the frictional coefficient, you take the frictional coefficient,
Mm-hmm.
and the frictional coefficient is always expressed in some level of force per unit area.
Right.
Okay. And the force is whatever downforce there is.
Mm-hmm. And
the area is the contact patch.
Right.
So as the contact patch gets larger, the force per unit area drops.
Oh, right. I mean, proportionally, right? Mathematically.
Yeah.
Okay.
So if you're building a light car and you have too much rubber back there, your friction is going to go down, not up.
Oh, wow. Oh, hang on. I just got to put my brain back into place. Sorry. Wow.
It's physics 101.
Right. Makes perfect sense. So the lighter the car, theoretically, the narrower a tire should be.
Within a range.
Right.
So, I mean, I like building scale models of 50s cars when they have narrow tires. I do that. I mean, it's.
Oh, that's wow.
I'm still suffering from the shock of seeing that six-wheeled Porsche 50 years ago.
I imagine at one point that same guy worked for Williams in the 70s and tried for at the back as well. That's wild. Oh, geez, that's really cool, Al. Very, very cool. Wow. Well, again, thanks. I'm really looking forward to seeing those builds as well. And I really appreciate you spending the time. Thank you so very much. We'll have to do this again.
Oh yeah, absolutely. This has been fun. I'll next time things have been a bit helter-skelter here. I decided I no longer needed a storage locker. So everything that was in the storage locker is now in my apartment.
Well, that's all right. Now that gives you more impetus to build.
Right. I can sort of wend my way through the boxes, but there are a couple of projects in the works which I think will be kind of interesting. I'll mention one last one.
Oh, please, please.
I was looking for materials to make some front ends.
Okay.
And one of the things on Slot Form International is a chap on there, I forget his name now, who's been doing some interesting things with chassis made out of aluminum channel.
Yes. Actually, I think he's Canadian, actually. Yes.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he's from Toronto. Yeah, his avatar is I think a green Chaparral 2D.
something like that.
Yeah.
So, are you in Montreal?
No, I'm in Toronto.
You're in Toronto. Okay. I was responsible for a laboratory in Toronto many years ago, and so I spent a fair amount of time there.
Well, I think you'd agree that Peter Ustinov, if you're a fan, was right that Toronto is New York run by the Swiss.
That's hadn't thought of it that way, but yes. And I even one of my trips there ended up visiting Ernie Massetti's shop.
Yeah, that was Race World. Now, which do you remember whereabouts in Toronto it was at the time? Because he had a few, and in fact, he's opening up a new slot car emporium this fall.
All I remember is I was staying in a hotel in downtown Toronto, and I had a rental car, and this place was way the hell and gone up on the north side.
Okay, I think I was probably might have been in Woodbridge or in North York at the time. Yeah.
It was a fair trip to get there.
Yep.
Yeah.
Wow.
Anyway, I wanted, to stick to my stainless steel, and unfortunately, I couldn't find any stainless steel channel. I did find some square stainless steel tubing.
Oh, so you can use your milling machine to do that,
Yeah,
right?
It's going to be an interesting challenge because, unfortunately, and I looked fairly extensively, the only tubing that I could find had a 1/16 of an inch wall.
Ooh.
It's a monster overkill.
Yeah.
I mean, 1/16 of an inch walls, square stainless steel tubing could serve as an A-arm for my real car.
And you don't want to mill the sides as well, right? So.
Well, what I'm working on is basically, and again, this is the advantage of steel, to see how much of it I can cut away and still maintain the strength to get it down to what I consider to be an acceptable weight.
Ah. So that's neat.
Well, I mean, think about it. Talk about, let's say, the front axle carrier. So you've got an upright with something on the end of it to accept whatever size axle or axle tube you want. Whatever that top is has to be big enough to accept that. But the piece between the top and the bottom, you think about it, a 1/16 by 1/16 of an inch square stainless steel stem, more than strong enough.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Yeah, you could, oh my gosh, you're right. Yeah, you could almost build a real car with that.
So my goal is to basically lay out the tubing, cut off the pieces, cut off the length that I need, and then cut, grind, and machine away about 90% of it.
Yeah. Oh my, yeah. Wow, that's like an old ship model from the 50s where they give you a block of wood, a picture, and a knife.
Yeah, been there, done that.
That's awesome. Well, that would be really, really neat to see. Although I'm surprised you can't find material with a thinner wall.
Maybe it's out there somewhere, but I have not found it. And I have some pretty good sources of raw material.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah, really cool.
Like the nickel silver that I talked about. I do have spools of nickel silver wire, which is very nice for detailing. And solders beautifully, doesn't tarnish. I've also got some nickel silver sheet, which cuts easily, solders beautifully, does not tarnish or discolor. There's only one problem with it. It's very damned expensive.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. Yeah, anything with like a nickel in it. Nickel prices are still pretty high, are they not?
Oh yeah. And I think a 12 by 12 inch sheet of like 40 thousandths nickel silver is, I don't know, something north of $30.
Wow.
Yeah.
Now, using that, how many cars would you be able to get out of that?
12 by 12 for the pans. I don't know. Let's see. Probably 6 by 4. Probably 20.
Oh, gee, so that's still relatively cost effective then.
Yeah, so on a per car basis, it's not bad. I think it's just the fact the material is somewhat uncommon because nickel silver is mostly copper.
Is it really?
Oh yeah.
Okay. Is that
Yeah,
one of the reasons that it solders so well as well?
Yeah, it's copper with a little bit of nickel, a little bit of zinc.
Ah, okay. So maybe it's the price of copper that's high. Cool. Very cool. Well, as I said, Alan, this has been absolutely wonderful. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Oh, I'm glad to do. I enjoyed it. Hey,
Well, same here.
It's fairly axiomatic that people enjoy talking about themselves, which is what I've been doing.
Well, just remember, I haven't heard your stories before, so for me, I'm a blank slate.
I do have one Canadian story to tell you.
Oh, please. Okay, got to hear this. Got to hear it.
This happens to be related to Montreal and not to Toronto, but 25, 30 years ago, more, at least 30 years ago, I was invited to participate in a seminar and a training session at the Alton Jones Cell Science Center, which is in Lake Placid.
Wow.
Okay. Now, there are two ways to get to, I was living in Chicago area at the time. There are two ways to get to Lake Placid from Chicago. You fly to Albany and drive north.
Mm.
You fly to Montreal and drive south.
Mm.
Well, if you've ever flown to the Albany airport, the choice is very easy to make. So I flew to Montreal and picked up, Hertz had a very nice bright red Firebird for me.
Nice.
And I drove south and I spent about almost a week in Lake Placid and then turned around and drove north. And I got to the border. This was a period of time, they may still be this way, that Montreal was very ardently Francophone.
They're still pretty Francophone.
So anyway, I get to the border and the border guard leans out and says to me, "Bonjour, monsieur, où demeurez-vous?" And I look back and because of background and, other things, without even thinking, I said, "Aux États-Unis, près de Chicago."
Very good.
He wasn't buying it. I'm driving a Firebird with Canadian plates coming back that fast.
Quebec plates, right?
Quebec plates coming back that fast in French. No. So we had this discussion, and then I remembered, fortunately, at that time, because I was traveling a great deal, I simply kept my passport in my briefcase.
Good for you, because now, of course, it's a requirement, but in those days, it wasn't at all.
So I dug out the passport and I showed it to him. Eh bien. Bonjour.
That's a great story. Oh wow! Well, on that, we'll call it a session. I'm just going to stop recording, and if we want, we can stay a little longer. But thank you so much again. We'll do it again for sure.
I hope you enjoyed watching. If you did, please leave a comment, like, and subscribe.